Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Undefined. And today I am really excited to talk to Melissa Locker. She's an author and she just put out this brand new book called And After All, A Fan History of Oasis. And what's really different about this book from a lot of the other things that you can get about Oasis is that it talks about a lot of history and moments that the fans will recognize, but instead of going through in like the lens of Oasis lore, it's the fans' perspective and the people that were at those events, at those shows, merch collectors, and it's really cool because it goes down all of the things that, as an Oasis fan, you remember, like the Whiskey A Go Go shows, the V Festival right before they split, and it's all through interviews with fans. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I am so excited to talk to Melissa. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. So I want to talk to you about how this book came to be. So I did some research, and even the book you said you were asked by your publisher to write a book about Oasis, and then you came up with that idea. What about fan culture, and specifically with Oasis, that gave you this idea that that's how you want to tell the story?
I think for me, the story of Oasis had been told so many times, and there had been
Hmm.
so many books. And Oasis had Paula Hewitt follow them around on tour and really
Hmm.
report on everything. So like, I feel like their story had been told. And so when I was asked to kind of come up with a pitch, I just started thinking about what hadn't been told, and I hadn't seen anything about the fans. And I grew up watching this documentary called Heavy Metal Parking Lot, which it's on YouTube. You can go watch it, but it's all filmed in the parking lot of a Judas Priest concert in like
Oh my
Bowie,
gosh.
Maryland, in like I think the early 80s. And it's just fans, and it just shows everything about the fan culture and about it's just nothing but these kind of hilarious interviews with fans. And there's also this great 33 and a third book about Celine Dion and about their fans. And I don't know, I think fan culture is really, really fascinating. And I think also as, the internet becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, the fan culture becomes more and more pronounced. And,
Mhm.
you obviously know about like the BTS fans or the BTS
Yes.
army and, the Swifties.
Hmm.
And there's so many massive fandoms out there. And so I just started thinking about other bands, and, Oasis just seemed like they must have incredible stories from their fans. And I think they do.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this idea specifically because I grew up like fan culture is very much in my DNA because I am 24 and so like as the internet came in that was a big part. But when I was younger, I got to see things like Justin Bieber take off and be a part of that as a little kid or like One Direction. So I had that kind of idea of like fan culture, but from like a young girl's perspective. And I think it's cool like the older that I get, and the shows that I go to now, I go to a lot of more like rock or Americana or indie shows. I'll see these like 50-year-old men who have like gone to see, like, we were just at a Wilco show a couple months ago, and my friend was standing next to this guy, and he was like, "Yeah, I saw them yesterday, and I'm gonna see them tomorrow too, and this is my 100th show." And so I'm learning more about this kind of different side of fandom from these different demographics. And so I think Oasis especially, it's so cool to hear that not just like the typical, when you think fandom or fangirl, you might have this certain notion, especially for the internet, but it's cool to get that wide range of experiences.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're at a Wilco show, that is full dad rock world. So
Yes.
yes, you're asking for it at that
Oh
point.
yeah, and the dad rock goes deep, yeah, for sure. And I
Yeah,
feel like
it's
a
like I
lot
went
of,
to see a band called Slow Dive,
yes.
and I looked around at something. I was like, "Oh, this is where all the 40-year-old dads are." Okay, like literally everyone in the theater. There were like a handful of like women, and everyone else was like a 40-year-old white man. I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is where they all are tonight."
Yeah, no, that's what I looked at my friend and I, we were driving home from that Wilco show, and we're like, were we the youngest women there, like that didn't come with their parents or their
Oh, I'm sure you
boyfriend?"
were.
We were like, and Moaxa had she open too, so that was amazing. But it's like, I don't think we're the demographic of this area. But even like those
Yeah.
corners, it's so interesting to hear about. Like, I feel like most artists, they have a deep fandom, whether you kind of seek it out, and Oasis being one of the most popular international bands in the world. Which leads me to, how did you kind of narrow this down in terms of finding people? Did you kind of have like, did you do research or know any names, or did you just kind of go into it blind and started to trying to track it down?
Well, I knew I wanted to tell the story of the band through the fans, and so I it became as I was working on it, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that I needed to find people who'd been at sort of specific shows. And so I needed people
Mhm.
who were at the beginning, like who saw them very, very early. And I wanted people who'd seen them very, very late. And then just at some of the more like iconic shows that, so that I could really tell the story of this band in evolution while also, telling stories about the fans. I was lucky in that I've been a music journalist for a really long time. And
Mhm.
so I knew some bands and some people who had opened for Oasis on some of the early
Oh,
shows.
nice.
And so I tracked them down. And so I think the first person I interviewed was this guy, John Dugan, whose band opened for Oasis at the 930 Club in Washington, D.C., and which is not a big venue. And
No,
Oasis,
yeah.
like, it's very small. And Oasis, was no one really knew who they were exactly. And so his band had just been asked, like, hey, do you want to open for this weird British band that's coming through? And he's like, yeah, I guess so. And so they were the first ones that I talked to. And then from there, I knew I wanted to talk to people who'd seen them in Manchester. And I knew I wanted to kind of track down some of the people who were around in those very, very early days to talk about what it was like when Oasis was, just getting started. And
Yeah,
I was able to, track some of them down, which is great.
it's really cool. And chronologically, I mean, it is so in depth because the book starts out with an interview with a fan that was a fan of the Inspiral Carpets, which is a band that Noel was a roadie for. And he wrote to the band, and
Yeah.
this kid was in the States, so he wrote to this UK band, and he gets the postcard from Noel. And then in the bands that Noel said of like that the Inspiral Carpets listened to, he put Oasis. So to have that cool piece of history, I mean, I feel like even just that part about Noel being a roadie is like deep in the lore. So how familiar were, because I'm sure being a music journalist, you've probably seen Supersonic, but like how familiar you were with Oasis and like what's your personal story with them before working on this book?
So I was a fan that they're incredible songwriters. It's hard to deny that.
Mhm.
I had seen them before. I knew the songs, I knew the general story, but I was not, I hadn't done a really, really deep dive into their kind of past. And, there were so many things that I learned while researching this book that were big surprises to me. But yeah, I mean, it's funny in retrospect. I was like, oh, I'm a fan. But then when you go and you meet people who've spent like $1 million on memorabilia, or you meet people who've gone to like 150 shows, or you meet people who have like camped out overnight on the sidewalk to go get tickets. And I'm like, it's hard for me to be like, I'm a fan because I'm not that much of a fan, not
Yeah.
compared to any of those people who are just like absolute super fans.
Yeah, I feel that too. Like a lot of my favorite bands too. I'm like, I'm such a huge fan of this band, but like, I haven't camped out. I don't have like all of the vinyl pressings or anything like that, or I've like gone to 50 shows. But it is cool to hear about the dedication. And then when I am just personally fascinated by Oasis lore, I feel like it's kind of an iceberg. I feel like a lot of people know, like, oh yeah, they're from the UK, the Britpop thing, Wonderwall, they have a feud with each other, but once you really go in and like not even like watching Supersonic, I feel like is a great way for people to get into that. But even after that, all of the crazy stories and the behind the scenes and even like how they got started. What were a few things that stood out to you while researching this lore? Because I've been having fun doing it just for fun on the side.
Um, I think I mean, there's so many great stories. And I mean, it's just such a fun concept of these two brothers from pretty like, poor means in like kind of suburb of Manchester, um, who set out to become the biggest band in the world. And then they actually did it. And I think that story resonated with fans all around the world. And I think one
Mhm.
of the biggest surprises I found while researching this book was how much that story resonated with people, whether they were in, Iraq, or they were in,
Mhm.
Japan, or in like Buenos Aires. Like that particular story of these two brothers setting out a dream for themselves and then making it happen was really inspiring. And I think that's kind of like that particular lore, I think
Mhm.
is incredible. And like the fact that it just resonated with so many fans was really surprising for me.
Yeah, I didn't really have that revelation too until I read the book because I had been thinking for a bit like they are so big internationally. In the book, you talk about how they have a huge base of fans in Asian countries and in Korea, and then there's a story about in Iraq. And I was just thinking, well, what is it? Is it just like Noel's songwriting that it does connect to a lot of like the human experience? And I feel like, stuff like Don't Look Back in Anger or Champagne Supernova, Rock and Roll Star, Slide Away, it's easy songs that you can know limited English to kind of connect those feelings. But I think you made a great point with that story that a lot of people just kind of dove and connected with them on a personal level. And I think like that was very like touching to read as well.
Yeah, I think it's there's something about those songs that just I really truly believe you could walk into a bar in almost any corner of the world and put on like Champagne Supernova or Wonderwall and people are going to sing along, which is incredible if you think about it. Like there's so few songs that that can happen with.
Yeah, I think it is really magical. And I've been thinking a lot too about the reunion and how like how everything is, and I read about it myself, like I feel like monoculture and like pop culture is kind of fading away. There's not that many things now like Wonderwall where you can put on a song and now everybody will know the words. I feel like with TikTok and the internet and algorithms, everybody's kind of listening to different things. And so I think this reunion tour is so special because you can see thousands and thousands of people all over the world traveling everywhere to just sing those songs. And I feel like it's kind of rare to happen these days. I mean, there are things like the Eras Tour and Beyonce, and there are big stadium tours, but to see, something so old, like not old, but something like it's been 15 years since they've been together, and to even
Yeah.
bring in new people, I think it's so magical. And then after, interviewing all these people and then reflecting on the reunion, what's your take on it?
As far as like why these songs resonate or
Yeah, or like, why do you think
yeah.
it's so important? Like, how this big community around Oasis? Do you think it
Yeah, I mean, I
resonates?
really think it's there's something about that backstory that people everywhere who feel like they were maybe born without all the privilege, or people who are born like without a lot of privilege and who feel like they, um, hey, if Noel Gallagher and Liam Gallagher could set out and basically like manifest this idea that
Hmm.
they're going to become the biggest rock stars in the world, if they could do it, like, why couldn't I do it too? And then there's also just something about the power of music. And like Noel Gallagher wrote some songs that just absolutely resonate and I mean, like with everyone around the world. And I think, if you look at the lyrics, he's not like the world's greatest lyricist. Some of the stuff
No.
doesn't make any sense,
Yes.
and it doesn't really matter. It's just like
Mhm.
it's really the power of music to bring people together. And they just wrote some incredible anthems that have just lasted. And I think people around the world, whether you're a kid in Iraq or you're a kid in Japan or you're a kid in Manchester, it's just going to, you know, it's just going to connect.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And well, recruiting all of these fans, are there any other particular stories of just talking to them that stood out to you and things that you learned that maybe weren't previously on your radar?
We sort of talked about it for a second, but Rasha's story in Iraq I thought
Yes.
was really, really interesting because she grew up under in Iraq under the regime of Saddam Hussein, and there were
Mm.
sanctions, and it was really hard to get any access to music. And she had lived in the States for a while and spoke some English, and was able to pick up some Oasis music via, I think it was like satellite radio from Syria or something, via, or not satellite, but like radio, like using her antenna from
Yeah.
her radio to collect, to get pirate radio from Syria. And she was able to find these Oasis songs and she just absolutely fell in love. And, obviously, I don't think, Oasis is going to tour through Iraq anytime soon. And they probably weren't expecting that a little girl in, Baghdad would be listening to their music, but she still found so much to love in that song. And that music just really helped her, kind of survive the regime and connect with the world outside. And now she's going to go see them for the first time in New Jersey. And that's incredible.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited for her. That gave me chills like reading her story. And I think sometimes we kind of don't realize how far music can go and how many lives it can touch. And so hearing stories like that, I think it's super inspiring that, you can just be these kids from Manchester and you can put out this music and then, years later, these kids in these completely different countries that you never think would listen to your music, and they've touched so many lives.
Yeah, and I think another thing with Oasis is they have this kind of reputation as like a bro band. Like it's just
Hmm.
like a whole bunch of boys and jocks listening to them. And I feel like that's not entirely like it's definitely true to an extent,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of little girls who grew up listening to Oasis too, and there's a lot of stories in the book and that I just heard as I was collecting the stories of like young women who just felt the same way, who just absolutely loved the music and spent their lives like you know collecting memorabilia, collecting like traveling around to see the band, who grew up and like named their kids after Oasis
Yeah.
members or Oasis songs. And yeah, I hoping that the book kind of pushes back against the idea that it is all just these kind of like frat boys listening to Oasis, because there's a lot of fans out there.
Yeah, and I love that too as a female Oasis fan. And I think the more that I dove into the culture and the fandom aspect, I did notice even like watching TikToks of the UK shows that they've done so far and the shows that they've done in Cardiff. I've seen like a lot of women, a lot of young women, and I think it's really cool because it does kind of fight against that stereotype. And it's neat in the internet too, in this age, which is different than their other tours, where you get to see these social media experiences like firsthand from the fans. And I've seen some videos of women that have gone out and traveled to see them and their experiences. And I think that's cool that, you get more representation of that. And I hope, with things like this book, people have less of it, like of that idea of, the fan base.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like in general, unless it's like Taylor Swift or like
Hmm.
BTS, I think
Yeah.
people do tend to be like, "Oh, boys are the music fans, rock and roll. Like music is, for boys in some weird way." And I think,
Yeah.
that's slowly, hopefully changing. But I do feel like particularly like rock music,
I was gonna say
um,
that.
it's very kind of boy-coded in this weird way, which is I always have found really obnoxious.
Right.
Um, and hopefully that will slowly go away. The idea that
Yes.
like, you know, rock is for the boys.
I agree, especially with like these mainstream bands and bands on Oasis's level. I mean, even like American bands like Nirvana or even like Blink-182, Green Day, or Pearl
Yeah.
Jam or Foo Fighters or whatever. Like, people kind of associate, oh, that's, it's a guy thing to do that, like Metallica, Guns N' Roses. Like, no, a lot of females can like rock music too. Like, we're camping out, going out to the shows, having all the merch. It's not just a guy's thing. And which leads me to kind of my next thing. We talked a little about it before the interview, but I want to know more of your experience as a female music journalist because you've been doing this since you were 15. And so I like to ask when I have artists on here, I like to ask how they got into music. So I want to ask the same question to you. How did you get into music? And then how did you get into music journalism? Like, were there any artists or albums that you listened to and it clicked? Like, oh my gosh, this is my thing?
Yeah, well, so I grew up in a pretty Christian household, and we weren't really allowed to listen to music at all outside of some very kind of select Christian albums. And so the my brother went away to camp, and he came
Mhm.
back. He was at like some and he came back from digging, he was digging fossils out in the Oregon desert, and he
Mhm.
came back and had gotten some music, some mixtapes from some young paleontologists, and he played me some Cure songs um, that he had, and I was just immediately like, "What is this?" And I think it's very much like the forbidden fruit sort of situation.
Yeah.
And I immediately just fell in love with music, and I started kind of sneaking around and trying to, find out more and more about music. And so, yeah, I would say The Cure was definitely like for me the gateway drug,
Mhm.
just because that was the first thing that I really heard. And
That's a great
then
first band to really get
yeah.
into. Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, I still absolutely love them and will go see
me
them
too.
whenever I have the chance. And it, yeah, so they just kind of opened this door for me. And then I started listening to more music. And then I just started, I don't know, I'd always wanted to be a writer. And I just started harassing the editor at the local alt weekly here in Portland, Oregon, and he was thought it was hilarious to have a 15-year-old kid go report. So I started interviewing bands, I started reviewing CDs, I started, and this was like CD'd,
Oh,
and,
wow.
and they yeah, and I just and then he would start me sending out to review shows, and I would have to like sneak into the shows because I wasn't old enough to actually get in them. And yeah, it just started a love of both music journalism and yeah, music and music journalism.
That's so awesome. And I can relate to that too. Because I started when I was 19 and I've been interviewing for a few years. But I love hearing stories like that. Do you have any fun memories of like those early days interviewing or covering shows? Are there any highlights for you? I know that might be a hard question.
No, gosh, there were so many. It's like I think one of my favorites was actually Elliott Smith.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it was like a few years. It was like the first band I ever I had to photograph them as well as I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. Like it was one of
Mhm.
the very first shows that I ever had to go to.
Wow.
And I was so shy and I was trying to take photos and I was just like kind of hiding in the back. And there was this woman, JJ Gonson, who did a ton of the like really iconic Elliott Smith photos.
Uh-huh.
And she just saw me just being this like little kid, like cowering in the corner and just basically shoved me in front of everybody and started making me take photos. And I still have the photos that she
Wow.
kind of made me take. And, but yeah, talking to him was amazing. And he's just like so sweet. And, you know, I think everyone was a little, you know, taken aback when this like 15-year-old comes up with like, you know, girl reporter style with like a notebook and a pencil and is just like, tell me your stories.
I love that so much. That is so cool. At least that is an awesome like first few shows to cover.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Well, I mean,
incredible.
that's one thing about being in Portland is there,
Yeah.
you know, there was a lot happening.
Yeah, a big music scene. Is you think like, being in a place like Portland, was it easy for you to kind of grow your taste after you found The Cure and to like kind of see what was playing locally or what was at a music shop?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of really good record stores and also a lot of all ages venues, which
Mhm.
makes a huge difference. Because my dad lived in Seattle, and Seattle has no all ages venues. They had
Really?
this thing called, or it may have changed now, but when I was a kid, they had this thing called the Teenage Dance Ordinance, where basically teenagers were not allowed in any live shows. And I have so
Really?
many and like I've been working on a couple different stories, and there are so many people I've talked to who grew up in Seattle, and like they were just kids, and all they would do is like hang out outside the venues and listen to the music because they weren't allowed inside. And so they would like these
Mhm.
friendships that would get struck up by teenagers literally sitting outside various like venues listening to like Nirvana come through the walls because they couldn't
Wow.
go inside. But Portland was lucky in that there were a lot of all ages venues, and you
Mhm.
know I think that actually makes a huge difference. And I'm a huge proponent of all ages venues, and there
Me too.
aren't nearly enough in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also what I've noticed too is that even if it's an all-age venue, certain bands have put age restrictions on shows, and I've been to some shows that I didn't even expect to have age restrictions. Like I saw They Might Be Giants a couple years ago, and they had an
They should
18
not have it.
plus. Yeah,
Oh,
I was like,
really?
they
And you're
make
like, no, you're for
kids
children.
music. Yeah, I'm like, well, they played the Flood album front to back, but I was like, there's nothing that they're doing at this show that is like inappropriate for children. I mean, and that's a perfect band to be a young
Yeah.
teenager or child's first concert too. And so things like that
Yeah.
I find interesting. Or like there'll be shows that's like 16 up and 21 and up, and I was like, okay, like I mean, it doesn't seem like it really elicits that age rating, but yeah, I'm a big proponent of going to shows early because I think I went to my first concert when I was 9. It was U2. So I've been seeing shows for a long time. So I think
Yeah.
that if a kid wants to go to shows, I think they should. I'm a big
Yeah.
proponent on that.
And I don't know, I have a kid, and, you know, when he was little, we were, you know, living in New York City, and I just wanted him to be able to go to concerts. And like, luckily, Madison Square Garden, you can bring anything or anyone,
Mhm.
doesn't matter. And so we were able to see some pretty incredible stuff. And then also the Brooklyn Bowl near
I've
us
always
was,
wanted to go there.
yeah, they had a bunch of bands would come in and do kids concerts in like the middle of the afternoon, which was awesome because he got to see some incredible bands who were just doing like kids shows. But
Oh
those were very
wow.
much for like the under 12 set, which is
Yeah.
a different, a little bit of a different vibe than seeing like Black Sabbath at Madison Square Garden.
Did he go see Black Sabbath in Madison
That was
Square?
his first concert.
Oh my gosh, how old is he?
Well, now he's giant. So,
Yeah.
but it's pretty, as a music journalist and, someone who cares
Uh,
about this stuff probably too much, I did want to make sure he had, a great answer for, like when you're at a party and someone asks the question, what was your first show?
yeah, that
And
is
I want him to be able
awesome.
to like have a good answer. Although I was at an event recently and someone asked, it was like a music event
Mhm,
and it was like a Grammy gala of some sort.
mhm.
And someone asked that, and someone at the table had the best answer I've ever heard, in that they went and saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium, like the first ever Beatles concert in the United States. I'm like,
Oh,
okay, you
that's the
win.
best one.
Like, you win.
Yeah, that is so good. Yeah, if I ever have kids, that's my plan too. I'm like, if you are wanting to go to concerts, we're gonna go to concerts. They have
Yeah.
to be cool. I'm like hoping that, they like the music that I like. Because I growing up, I was lucky that my parents listened to a lot of music. So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
how I got into music at a young age. And then they started taking me when I was around 9 or 10. So that's really awesome. And kind of back to Oasis, what were the concerts of theirs that you saw? What era was that?
I saw them play in I didn't see either of the two early show or like when they were touring with the two early concerts. I'm pretty sure it was the Be Here Now concert when they played in outside in Maryland
Oh,
in like
nice.
2000 or something. Yeah, it was funny because I was trying, it's like I knew I had seen them and I could not. And I had to like pour over the list of concert venues, being like, it must have been like in DC or Maryland because that's where I was living.
Hmm.
And I was like, had to like pour over the list and try and figure out which one it had been to. But I did figure it out. It was in Meriwether Post Pavilion.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems like a small venue for them now, now that they're,
I know
playing a bunch of
exactly.
stadiums, but that's cool. And I feel like Be Here Now, and I'm really fascinated with the kind of after the What's the Story era of Oasis because I feel like,
Hmm.
people, and rightly so, when they think Oasis, they think of those two albums because those two albums are pretty much like perfect albums. But I feel like there's a lot of strong material on Be Here Now and After, but I feel like it gets overlooked. And did you kind of go back and revisit those albums when you were working on this? And what's your opinion on them? Because I'm always interested in that.
Yeah, well, in like Standing on the Shoulder of a Giant, I don't think I had ever heard. Some of their later stuff, I had definitely kind of dipped out of the fandom at that point. But
Hmm.
interviewing all these fans, like there were several fans who came in like on those later albums who just like their fandom started with
Hmm.
albums that I had never really heard. And so I did go back and listen to some of them and be like, oh, that's where that came from. And I was talking to Greg Glover, who's in the book, and he had become a huge fan of the band on the later albums as well. And I think it was a little bit ironic, but also
Hmm.
he really loved those albums.
Yeah, and I
So yeah.
think like for any other rock band or alternative rock band, those would have been like high charting albums and like really successful for them. But I think Oasis, like when you start out of the gate with two albums that are just massive and you can't really surpassed Wonderwall. But I love kind of learning into the history and their tours in their later years. I just watched there was a documentary that I found on YouTube. I can't remember the name. It was in 2005, but it was them touring worldwide and when they went in the States, they play Red Rocks and I was like, could you imagine
Oh,
seeing
that'd be the
Oasis at
dream.
Red Rocks? Like that's
Yeah.
crazy to kind of learn from that standpoint where they were, and they were still very popular. So I love
Yeah,
that.
well, I think you're sort of touching on something that has been coming up a little bit in
Hmm.
that the when Oasis never really made it huge in the US. Like
Yes,
they
I
were
wanted to talk
always
about.
much bigger in the UK and in I mean honestly in the rest of the world than they ever were in the US. They were playing tiny venues for years here when they were selling out massive stadiums in
Hmm.
like the UK particularly. And Japan, they were almost
Yeah.
immediately massive in Japan. And they came back here and played at a club in Portland. They were playing huge stadiums in Japan. They came back to the States and toured the West Coast and were playing venues that are the size of like garages.
Yeah.
And now I think Oasis fandom has finally hit the States and they're playing venues that they never would have been able to sell out. in like the 90s or 2000s. And they come in, they're playing, like MetLife, which is
Yeah.
huge. And they're playing, the Rose Bowl, which is massive. And they would never have been able to sell those out in like the 90s or 2000s at all.
I think that is such an interesting thing to note too, because in that tour, in that documentary I was watching, because it showed the whole world tour, so it'd be like them at Wembley, of course Wembley's huge, and then them in Korea, they're playing these massive shows, and then when they get to America, they're playing amphitheaters. I'm like, amphitheaters are big, but in the contrast of what they're playing, I think it's so interesting. And what do you think why they didn't really break in America? Because I know a lot of people blame it on the Whiskey A Go-Go show. And I was like, that's an interesting way of just that one concert not going well of why they didn't break it here. Or like what's your personal kind of theory of why you don't think they hit with American audiences in the way that they hit internationally?
I mean, I think it was sort of just the way the radio worked at the time. I think they just never quite got the radio play that they were getting elsewhere. I think they just were a little under the radar. And then at first, they were kind of this cool British import band, and they were playing these small venues. And like it was people who subscribed to like Melody Maker, NME, or who knew about
Hmm.
every single British import. They were going to see them. And then they immediately got kind of like too big for that. And I don't think the fandom quite figured out like who this band was before they got really, really massive in the UK. In the US, I think they had started out as this kind of like cool under the radar band, and then they got so big that I don't think booking agents knew where to book them, and I don't think radio knew quite what to do with them. And then they started, obviously Wonderwall hit in the US too, but and that's when they started playing like the amphitheaters and things. But then yeah, I think it was just it was like kind of a timing issue. And by the time, I think the US is a slower market, particularly for British bands back in the day. And I think they got so big in the UK so quickly, and the US was still
Hmm.
playing catch up for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And while you were talking about that, I was also thinking, I think, rock, I think they can sell out stadiums now because of course time has passed and there's a bunch of reasons of that. But I feel like rock radio was way bigger than it is now. And I feel like there was a bunch of big bands that were way, prominent in the US that were kind of doing their thing and maybe taking away that attention that the Oasis could have gotten because there were a lot of huge rock bands in the 90s and especially in that mid 90s, early 2000s period.
Yeah, and I think they Oasis was a little hard to categorize, particularly for US radio, where they did go from being this kind of like kind of under the radar British band to suddenly becoming massive, but didn't have like the built-in audience that they'd already kind of generated in the UK. And yeah, I think it just like people in like US radio, there was a lot more competition, and people just didn't quite know what to do with them. I mean, they obviously had fans. They were playing amphitheaters, but they also, they had a reputation in the US for canceling tours halfway through
Yes,
or for like
that's
randomly
another
not
reason why
showing
they
up.
probably didn't break here. Yeah, I forgot about
Yeah, or
that.
they would just like, like Liam would just not show up and Noel would have to perform like all of the songs. And people just never quite knew what they were getting. And I think it made it a little difficult to really establish a massive fan base here. And I mean, that's not to say they don't have fans here, because they absolutely do. But they couldn't have sold out, 3 nights at the Rose Bowl. They couldn't have sold out 3 nights at the Garden or at MetLife, and they were able to do it within minutes this time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, I feel like the null part is also something that is really outlined in this book. One of my favorite stories is the Snow Oasis. It was this big radio show. It was going to be Oasis at the ski resort. It was like a typical alt radio festival lineup. I've been to them in the past where it's a lot of like the big bands that are currently playing on the radio in this one venue, and Oasis was like the main thing. And then it's freezing. It's just
Yeah.
Noel, not Liam. Noel plays for like two songs. His hands are freezing. Then
Yeah.
they leave and everybody's upset. How did you even find out about that show? Was that like something that was like widely published, or did that you just kind of come about that and like, oh, I want to include this in the book?
Well, I'll tell you a secret. That was actually that's a friend of mine, and
Oh wow.
he's a huge fan, and he
Mhm.
had told me about that story. So when I was like, I have to talk to you about Snow Oasis because I know you were there, and I know it almost like you almost like never listen to Oasis again, like after it. So that one was one of the easier stories for me to find actually in the book because yeah, he's a friend of mine.
Wow. And did you ever get to talk to anybody that was at MTV Unplugged? Because I know that's talked about a little bit in the book, but
Yeah, I didn't find anyone who had been there and instead was sort of relying on secondary sources for that. And I
yeah.
mean, it was pretty, and like you can watch the clips of it, and Knowles talked about it a fair amount in
Mhm.
interviews. And I mean, it was a pretty low point for the band and I think for the relation between the brothers because
Oh
Liam
yeah.
got really drunk and just sat outside yelling and like heckling his own brother performing his songs, which
Mhm.
if that was my brother I would have murdered him.
Yeah,
So
I'm kind of surprised that Noel really made it as long as he did because there were so many moments where, I mean, he has bigger patience than I would have because I would have been out. And I think the MTV Unplugged is one of my personal favorite parts of Oasis lore. And I actually found on Paramount Plus they have all of the unplugs and the storytellers from VH1.
yeah.
So I went and I watched the Oasis episode, and you could see Liam heckling. But that's a great performance by Noel. But yeah, it is a dark history, and I would be disappointed if I was a fan and I was expecting them both, and I just got Noel, even though I really love Noel's acoustic recordings. I think
Yeah,
some of my
no, I
favorites are
mean,
some of those demos that it's just Noel on the guitar singing those songs.
yeah, no, I mean he's good, but it's just it's different. It's not Oasis. It's Noel.
Yes. And then kind of connecting to that, I mentioned the demos. Another thing that I feel like is more prominent in the Oasis fandom than in a lot of other kind of big like stadium bands is the band's relationship with their B-sides is that the master plan, it's an album, but it's all B-sides. And a lot of those, quite a few of the songs on the set list and some of their biggest songs like Acquiesce, The Master Plan, the song are B-sides, even Talk Tonight. And it's a lot of the fan base, and it's referenced in the book. It's a lot of people's favorite songs. I think from your
Yeah.
perspective as a music fan, what do you think, like specifically with this band, their B-sides are really well known, whereas I feel like in a lot of other fandoms, it's kind of harder to find those B-sides or like to mention it to fans and they might not know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and to kind of go back to one of your earlier questions about like
Mhm.
what I as a fan had to like learn, there was a
Mhm.
lot of like stuff about B-sides and like particular pieces of like merch that
Mhm.
because I wasn't so incredibly immersed in the fandom, I did not know about. And I had to go do a lot of research. Like people just
Mhm.
start talking about various songs, and I'd be like, I don't know that one. And I'd have to go track it down because the B-sides are very much a part of the kind of Oasis legends. And because they managed to put everything together on the master plan, and because I think people were, just very early on swapping, they were, they were swapping tapes and they were swapping CDs, mix CDs or whatever. And they were because Oasis was one of the kind of first bands that were breaking at the same time the internet was becoming a thing, it became much easier for people to sort of swap tapes and swap and start talking more about like the B-sides and about like these things that would only come out in the UK or only come out in Japan or only come out in Mexico. And people could they'd find out about them and they'd track them down and people would send each other tapes or they'd send each other like mixed CDs or something. And the B-sides I think became such an important part of the fandom, partially because of the internet and fans being able to share this information with each other.
Yeah, and the internet kind of brings me to another topic we've been talking about is like their growth in America. Do you think, doing all this research on the fans that have been there since the beginning, and then you at the end of the book you talk about kind of the newer generation of fans and fans that have been raised on them, and then you have people like myself, like I wasn't raised on Oasis. I found them on my own accord and kind of researching the band, I found like a whole space of the internet of thousands and thousands of young fans that have just gotten into that on their own. Do you think kind of the internet is definitely a reason why you think they've made it big in the States, especially with this new generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think like as I just mentioned, they were one of the first bands to really have like a internet presence and to have an internet-based fandom. And I think that that has kind of continued that they still have their stupid oasis inet.com
Yeah.
like internet site which was so stupid, but they stuck with
Yeah.
it, and they had a really early ardent fandom online, and I think that most of that is still sort of present. I also, though, for like the younger generation, and you could probably attest to this more than me, but I think it's just
Mhm.
like the songs are really good. And you
Yeah.
hear those songs and you're just like, oh, who's this? Like, I like this music. I like this song. I'm going to find out more about them. And then because they have been online pretty much since the
Mhm.
beginning, you're going to find a lot of information about them.
Yeah, that is kind of my story about how I got into them because I've known all the singles and I've always liked them, but when I first heard those songs, I was really little and the internet was still kind of new and I did like to go on YouTube and watch music, but it didn't click like that I could go and do that for Oasis. And then recently, my friend was playing Supersonic. I was like, this is amazing. And then I found Live Forever. I was like, this is also amazing. I'm like, I need to finally do this and like watch the documentary. And then,
Yeah.
a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And I
think
mean,
that's
that's the
cool.
thing. It's like I think because they have such a big internet presence, they have a lot of rabbit holes for you to fall down, which
Oh,
is,
yeah.
great.
Yes, it is very fun. And so I wanted another part of the end of the book that I wanted to talk about just because it uh, blends another interest of mine is that the connection between Nick Harmer from Death Cab for Cutie in Manchester, because Death Cab is probably my favorite band. So,
I was just hanging out with them yesterday.
oh my gosh, was it at the Plans tour?
No, I'm going to that next week. They were doing a show in Portland,
Oh my
and
gosh,
yeah, got to see
how
them just yesterday.
how was it?
Oh, obviously, always good.
Oh yeah, I saw
Um,
them.
although my personal, I was teasing them because I have a personal album that is my all-time favorite, and they
Mhm.
never play songs from it. And so I'm fingers crossed that at the Plan Store they're going to play a couple of the songs off of "We Have the Facts," which
Oh
is my
yes, I
that's
love
my
we have.
favorite album. And I'm
Oh
like, you guys never play songs from it ever, and I personally
right.
would like you to start.
Please, I feel like they should do a request show because they have such a good discography and their like Plans and Transatlanticism are perfect. But I love Narrow Stairs a lot. And they
Yeah,
don't
they played a
play.
couple songs from that yesterday, which was
Oh my
exciting. And
gosh.
yeah, but I mean, they've been doing so many anniversary tours that I think yesterday was fun because they had a pretty diverse set for the first time that I'd seen in a long time.
I would love that. I've only seen them twice. I saw them in 2018 and it was a great set because it was Thank You for Today, but then they did like Long Division and they did oh gosh, they did some off of Codes and Keys. They did What Sarah Said. They did a bunch of the hits from Transatlanticism, and then I saw the Transatlanticism tour in Nashville, and I never thought I would be able to see the Postal Service. And
Yeah,
like
it's
those
fun,
albums are
right?
like, oh, it was crazy. Yeah, Ben Gibbard's like my hero, so it was cool to see like, oh, Death Cab in Oasis book. But how did you get him in the book because you had known them?
Yeah, and Nick and I go way back.
Mhm.
We have a book club together, and
Oh, I love that.
but I had put out several calls for people like just on social media, whatever, being like, please tell me all your Oasis stories. And so Nick told me the one that's in the book,
Mhm.
and it just made me laugh. So I included it.
Is he a fan too, or is that just like something silly that you
He's
just
a little bit of a fan, but I
yeah.
think he's more just like was just being a smart aleck when in Manchester.
I love it. Yeah, I was just like, oh, this is a combination of my two
Yeah.
favorite things. I was like, I had to bring that up because I'm such a Death Cab nerd.
Oh yeah, no, it's he when he told me that story, I was cracking up laughing because I'm like, of course you accidentally kickstarted the Oasis reunion.
Yeah, hey, it's good manifesting. He spoke it into existence.
Exactly.
That's so awesome. And so, kind of rounding things out here, another interesting thing that the book focuses on that I really didn't think about too much when originally thinking about fandom is the merchandise and the collectors. Um, as a music fan yourself, was that something that you have done? And like, what was your connection with that? And like, what did you learn about like, it's almost like historians of these people that, go and
Yeah.
find all of these things like laminates and guitars and drum sets and stuff that I couldn't even think of that they were able to just track down and then show it to the
Yeah.
band and the band doesn't even remember.
Yeah. It's like when you collect something that even the band is like, where the hell did you get that?
Mhm.
And like that's pretty impressive. But yeah, I personally do not have a collecting bone in my body. Like
Mhm.
I am the least sentimental human on the planet. We'll just get rid of everything.
Yeah.
Like sort of famously and probably regretfully. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, sometimes you talking to these some people and they have like the t-shirt that they wore to the first concert. They have every single ticket stub. They have every single poster. They have
Mhm.
every laminate they've gotten. They have every album and B-side and import and every version of Wonderwall that was ever released. And then they have, there's some collectors who go really, really deep and have like the suit that Noel wore in one video, or they have, a drum kit that the original drummer played in on one album. And they just the collecting that gets done is absolutely incredible. I yeah, I don't have that bone in my body. I don't know what that is. I am really excited that people do have
Mhm.
that and can tell the stories about it. It's not for me.
Yeah, I thought about it too because I do collect things, but I mean I'm casual. Like I have CDs, I have vinyls. I like to get posters sometimes. I don't get them all the time. I think the thing I have the most of are tour t-shirts, but I mean the
Yeah.
niche and the narrow things that these people are able to track down, I feel like it's an art.
Yeah, no, it really is. And it's like, it also gets fiercely competitive. It is a crazy, crazy community that I would love to explore more because, like I said, that's so far from my reality that people willing to spend like, $100,000 to have, I don't know, like the scooter that was used to promote a concert in the UK and
Hmm.
the just like these items that I don't know, I find it really, really fascinating. It is a very interesting and intense community of people who really do track down all this stuff. And, they have, I think, they get DMs from on Instagram or on like, people have tracked them down via eBay and be like, hey, I have a watch that I know that, Bonehead used once in third grade. Will you buy it? And they'll be like, absolutely. And I love it. I think it's totally fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there needs to be museums of this kind of stuff. I mean, I've gone to places like the Country Music Hall of Fame, and you're able to see some of like cool things like that, but like just like an Oasis museum would be so cool.
Oh, yeah. And well, I mean, there's a couple collectors. This guy Kyle Dale, who works. I can't remember where he's based. He's in the UK, and he puts
Yeah.
on shows of Oasis memorabilia, usually as fundraisers for like the Salford Boys Club or for other like noble
Hmm.
causes. And he will put together like little displays. And this guy, Rob, I can't remember Rob's last name. He's in the book. He also puts together shows, and yeah, you can totally find these kind of incredible collections, and they do go on display occasionally, and it's definitely worth seeing them.
Oh, I love that. I hope they do some kind of like pop-up or something at the LA shows because I would love to see. Yeah, and so wrapping up, what else would you like people to know about your career as a journalist and where else we can find you kind of past the Oasis stuff because you do much more than that. And I want you to tell the listeners on where to find you and any other cool
Yeah.
projects that you're working on.
Well, I do a lot of podcasting, and I don't have any immediate projects. I am working on something about the year 2004 in indie rock.
Oh,
Death Cab for Cutie will definitely be featured in that one,
it's
as
another
well
big
as,
interest of mine.
yeah,
2004.
Modest Mouse, Indie,
Yeah.
Iron and Wine, Tegan and Sarah,
Oh,
Arcade Fire, The Shins, Spoon, like they're all in it. So that
oh my
is
gosh.
slowly coming out. And you can also find I do a lot of interviews with them in the Believer magazine. Just did a big one with Lyle Lovett.
Love, I love it.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And yeah, and then, working on some new book projects.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to check out more of that stuff. I'll definitely have to check out the interview with Lyle Lovett because he's one of my favorites. I'm big into like Americana, that kind of
Yeah,
genre. So
he's amazing.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's one of
and
my
the
favorites.
and for better or worse, my editor at The Believer did tell me that that was the most Melissa interview he had ever read. So I don't really know what that means, but that's apparently what it is.
I love that. That's awesome. And so, the Oasis, the U.S. tour, the Rose Bowl, they're going to be there the 6th and the 7th of September. I'm going to be
Yes.
there on the 6th. And you have an event coinciding with those dates. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will be at Book Soup, which is a bookstore in LA, and it's not too far from the Rose Bowl. And so, yeah, hopefully people who are coming into town for the concert will want to swing by and listen to me yammer on about this book some more.
Awesome. And is there a time for that posted yet, or is that going to come out
I think it's like
closer?
3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I would have to confirm. But I believe it's
Awesome.
around 3. But if you look at the Book Soup website, it should say.
All right, cool. And I'll put it in the description. So, well, it was great talking to you, and I look forward to keeping up with your work and reading about that indie book. That's going to be exciting. I'm definitely going to check that
Yeah.
out. And thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah. Thank you so much.